Welcome to Journey into the Mystic, a podcast where we uncover the powerful intersections between the mystical and Eros. Eros is an essential energy force emerging from our desire for connection with ourselves, others, and the world. It evokes beauty and leads us to understand essential truths, unifying masculine and feminine energies into creativity and genius. Each episode of the podcast delves into themes of liberation, healing, and connection, guiding those seeking deeper self-understanding and richer relationships. We explore practices and philosophies that unlock new dimensions of being, diving deep into mystical states and their significance for personal growth and well-being. Mystical states are defined and marked by profound changes in perception, thought, and emotion, offer experiences of unity, timelessness, and deep insight. Whether induced by meditation, prayer, psychedelics, orgasmic meditation, or spontaneous occurrences, these states evoke feelings of transcendence and profound creation. Join us as we explore the path to the mystical state through in-depth discussion, expert interviews, and personal stories, offering insight, inspiration, and challenges at every turn. I am your host, Rachel Pelletier, an 18-year erotic practitioner and explorer of mystical states. Today, I am joined again by my dear friend, Lama Mike Crowley, known as the Psychedelic Lama. A Vajrayana Lama since 1970, Lama Mike is known for his pioneering exploration of the intersection between Tibetan Buddhism and psychedelics. He has published 2 books, Psychedelic Buddhism, A User's Guide to Traditions, Symbols, and Ceremonies, and The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, Psychedelic Sacraments, and the Origins of Vajrayana, where he delves into the historical and spiritual aspects of psychoactive substances within the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. His writings and ideas have sparked considerable debate and interest within the realms of Tibetan Buddhism and the study of psychedelics. His work serves as a bridge between Tibetan Buddhism and the world of psychedelic exploration, making him a notable figure in the ongoing dialogue surrounding these subjects. Lama Mike is also a member of the advisory board of the National Psychedelic Sangha, and it is my great honor and great pleasure to welcome Lama Mike Crowley. How are you?
Moderately well, thank you. I'm getting older by the day.
Okay, well, I was so excited to talk to you the first time, so I wanted to talk to you again. And I have 3 questions. We'll see how far we get, and maybe we'll do part 3 if we need to. Okay, so let's dive in. So you recently wrote a piece on Ratī. Is that how you pronounce it?
How I pronounce what?
Ratī.
Oh, Ratī. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, yeah.
The demonic princess. And I was wondering actually if you could talk more about her place in Tibetan Buddhism, if you could talk more about the piece that you wrote.
Right. Well, she seems to be a Buddhist version of Kali, and but has acquired quite a lot of obscure symbolism. And my piece was an attempt to explain the various symbols about her, even though I can't explain them all, like why her mount. She has shown, I should explain, riding a 3-legged ass, which has an eye on its rump. Now, I can't explain why it's a 3-legged ass, nor why he has a an eye in his rump.
Right.
But I've attempted to explain a bunch of other symbols.
Yeah. I saw in the piece, hold on, let me just pull it up one moment. So there is an image that you put in here around the Amanita Muscaria. And I was wondering how does it work with her and her symbolism?
Well, it seems that in part she might be a symbolic representation of Amanita Muscaria in some respects. In other respects, it could be Psilocybe cubensis, which I've laid out in that paper. So it does seem that there are several Tibetan deities which relate to Amanita Muscaria. Like one very important one is Vajrayogini.
I was just going to ask you, and I was curious, do those two relate in any way?
They seem to be parallel creations.
Okay.
They're not directly related. Although I must say that Vajrayogini has split off into another deity, another goddess, which is Sengdongma, the lion-faced or lion-headed deity. She's also called Singhamukha, which they mean approximately the same thing. Now she has a blue body and a white head, rather similar to Psilocybe cubensis. And I don't think if you came across that same symbolism, you might assume the same thing. And I'm not here to say that you're wrong,
Right.
although I've never had any actual confirmation that that she is that. It just seems to be that Vajrayogini or Vajravarahi, the diamond sow, as she is sometimes called, when needed for more powerful purposes in a magical context, when you need more powerful protection, you invoke her other aspect as Sengdongma.
And that's the lion-headed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the lion has a white head with a bluish green mane. I'm not sure where the green comes in, but she is definitely a form of Vajrayogini, and in the Nyingma lineage, Sengdongma or this lion-headed deity, Singhavaktra and so on, is thought of as being a form of the person we call Padmasambhava.
Got it.
I mean, that is Padmasambhava it's interesting. He is normally shown in 8 different forms. Padmasambhava is one of them.
And what are the other 7?
Oh, you got me now. I can't recite them all. But the interesting thing is the Tibetans don't call him that. It's only Westerners, as somebody in the 19th century like spotted him and started calling him by this one aspect, Padmasambhava. And the Tibetans call him Guru Rinpoche, the precious teacher.
Mm.
And Singdoma or Singhavaktra is seen as an aspect of his, but is not one of the 8 normal aspects.
Mm.
So that's only in the Nyingma sect, though. Then she seems to have been introduced in the second wave of Buddhism, which came to Tibet, which started in the 11th century. First of all, you had Padmasambhava, as we call him, Guru Rinpoche, coming to Tibet, aiding in the building of the Samye temple. I don't know if you know the legend.
I don't. I would love to know.
It says that he was, well, first of all, there was an Indian teacher called Sangharakshita who was advising the Tibetans in the creation of this first ever Buddhist temple in Tibet.
Mm.
And unfortunately, whatever they built in the daytime was destroyed at night. And they couldn't get to the root of this. And Sangharakshita said, well, maybe I can't manage this, but I know someone who can. And they sent for Guru Rinpoche, who lived in the land of Odiyana. Now, that in itself is kind of a problem. Some people say it's Bengal, but most people seem to think of it as the area to the west of Tibet, what nowadays would be Afghanistan or northern Pakistan. And so he came to aid in the creation of the temple. He immediately saw what was wrong, and said that you're building it on a site of some local deities, some local demons, and so he convinced these local demons not to be destructive, and bound them to Buddhism, to be protectors of Buddhism.
I love that.
Well, it seems to be a polite fiction for the way that Buddhism adopted local deities to be protectors of Buddhism. Quite a smart move. It was similar to the way that Christians moved in on Northern Europe and made, for instance, Saint Bridget an important part of the Irish pantheon. Before the Christians got there, Bridget was a goddess.
Right.
Of course, they demoted her to a saint.
Right.
And said, you can carry on worshiping her, but she's just a saint, remember. So there is no evidence that Bridget ever existed, except in the minds of the pre-Christian Irish, and then lived on as Saint Bridget to this day. So we got a long way from Sangdongma, from Singhavaktra, Rimati. Well, some traditions have Rimati and Sangdongma as separate deities, separate entities entirely. Other legends say that they were just alternative names. And the legend describes how Rimati or Singhavaktra and her husband, who I don't recall was ever given a name. I don't know the name of him. But they made love, and in doing so created both Soma and Amrita.
Mm,
This is about the only Buddhist legend I know of where they mention Soma.
mm,
And we are familiar with Soma as being mentioned in the Rig Veda, which, by the way, is the oldest religious text still in use in the world. This is the Hindu text of the invaders of northwestern India, the Arya, who were about 2,500 BC, marched in with their cattle and their horses, and they introduced horses to India. By the way,
mm.
they were they were unknown in India. Well, there are a few bones which have been found, which are thought to be perhaps the remains of horses of traders from Central Asia. Now, in the Rig Veda, they have various different names for Soma, as it's a poetic work, and poets are notorious for their fancy use of words. So they called it Sukla, Shukra, and Amrita, as well as Soma. Soma means that which is pressed out, basically juice.
Mm.
It it just meant juice. It wasn't terribly specific. We couldn't take that word and work out what Soma was,
Right.
but it's more than likely that it was the mushroom Amanita muscaria. Now, just because you may have taken mushrooms, you may have taken psilocybe mushrooms and had a whale of a time on them, doesn't mean to say that you're going to have the same effects on Amanita muscaria.
Right.
They are often described as psychoactive, but I don't think you could call them psychedelic.
Right.
Um, they will knock you out, but it is advised that you fight off all tendency to sleep
Mm.
and stay awake through it. So you actually experience the effects of these mushrooms. I've tried them. I'm not fond of them. I would much prefer psilocybe.
Right.
But this term Amrita is used in the Rig Veda to mean both. Well, it means the same as Soma. And later, somewhat later in the Vedic period, they mention another mushroom.
Mm.
In the now the third of the four Vedas is called the Yajur Veda, and we have three different versions of it.
Mm.
Not a word of these three is in common. And the Indian Brahmins either revered the white Yajur Veda, the black Yajur Veda, or the speckled Yajur Veda, and there were three different books, and they all had their adherents. Now, in the speckled Yajur Veda, it mentions these two different substances,
Right.
not by name, not by calling them Soma and Amrita. It just says that there are many Somas,
Mm.
plural. They are scattered upon the ground. So it's a plant, it's something which grows up from the ground. And they are known to the girls who fetch water from the well and to the boys who look after the cows. and they're described in two different ways. They say they are the blue somas and the red somas, the red and white. Later on, we find that they are given different names. Eventually, the Vedic culture kind of died out. Oh, and by the way, there are auxiliary books to these to the Vedas, and in these other books, they describe how you are to acquire Soma, because it seemed that they cut down the forests to make more pasture land for their cows. But in doing so, what they didn't realize is that Amanita muscaria is a mycorrhizal mushroom. That is, it needs the roots of a vascular plant, in particular, various species of pine, or it can't grow. And so they destroyed their main entheogen, and then turned to the local natives to provide it for them. And these ancillary books, they're called brahmanas, describe how you are to acquire these mushrooms. It doesn't call them mushrooms, it just says Soma.
Right.
And basically they describe how you are to cheat the natives.
Oh my God.
It says, for instance, you show him your best cow and then deal with him to how many cows he's going to get or whatever. And when he's handed over the mushrooms, you give him your worst cow. And it actually puts this in writing, and this is what we're supposed to do. And it keeps saying, it keeps denigrating the locals by saying the sober dealer is a cheat. The sober dealer is a and they give all these reasons why you should defraud the Soma dealer of his Soma. Anyway, when we come much later, at least 1,000 years later, we are now talking about Soma and Amrita as two different things. And the Buddhist legend of Ratī describes how, and as I said earlier, she's usually synonymous with Singhamukha, same thing. And it describes how she has sex with her husband, and this gives rise to these two different plants, to Soma and to Amrita. And this is just about the only place I can find in I think it is the only place in Buddhist literature where Soma and Amrita are said to be two different things. My assumption is that Soma is Amanita muscaria and Amrita is the Psilocybe cubensis mushroom. So where were we on the symbolism of Singhamukha?
Well, I was curious. I mean, I was curious because you put in your piece on Ratī the Amanita muscaria. And so would you say she's a deity form of that mushroom?
Yes, but also I point out in the article also she is a deified form of the Psilocybe cubensis.
She's both.
Yeah, she's
Okay,
both.
got it.
And you'll notice that above her head in the drawing which I had in the article, and it's the same in all depictions of Singhamukha.
Mm,
Above her head is a parasol, and it's not an ordinary parasol because it doesn't have a handle.
got it.
Just the top of the parasol floating above her head. And another remarkable thing about it is that it is made of peacock feathers.
Mm,
Now, I have written elsewhere about the peacock as a symbol of Shiva, who, of course, is a Hindu deity, and not a Buddhist deity at all. And there is, in fact, a folk version of the Hindu myth of churning the ocean. You may recall that the gods, the Hindu gods, had to call upon the indigenous gods of India in order to churn the ocean.
mm,
I mean, the myth. I mean, the myth is told 7 different ways in the Indian Puranas. The Puranas are the myths, the storehouse of myths, and each of these tells a variant of the legend, and what they all have in common is that the god Vishnu has an avatar called the Kurma avatar, which is a turtle.
mm.
And the turtle is like sits on the bottom of the sea. They take a mountain, Mount Mandara, turn it upside down and place it on the turtle's back. Then they take a naga. We don't have a word in English for naga. It's a snake spirit, and this is a king of the nagas, and so he is immense. He is vast, and he is coiled 3.5 times around the mountain.
Mm.
Then Vishnu, as the god Vishnu, sits on top of the mountain. He also is in the lineup of the gods who has the tail of this naga. The demons, the indigenous gods of India, have the head of the snake, and they haul it back and forth, spinning the mountain round for 1,000 years.
Mm.
Now, something to point out here is the number of times the snake spirit is wound around the mountain, which is 3.5. Now, you may have this may ring some bells with you. I don't know. In Indian homes where they would grind grain, the rope was wound 3.5 times around the grinding stone.
I did not know that, but that's fascinating.
And also you should know that in Hindu thought, Kundalini, the dormant enlightenment within us all,
Mm.
is in the form of a snake wound 3.5 times around the base of the spine.
That I did know.
Ah, so um, and when Kundalini is awakened, of course, she becomes Shakti, energy.
Right.
So they haul back and forth on this Naga called Vasuki for 1,000 years.
Mm.
And eventually all these various precious gifts come forth from the ocean. Another result of hauling this snake spirit back and forth for 1,000 years means that the snake becomes rather ill, and he is fed up with being hauled back and forth, and eventually he vomits over the indigenous gods of India.
My God.
Which is why the crafty Aryan gods took hold of his tail.
Got it.
So either they produce all these things eventually with they produce a doctor, Dhanvantari, who is carrying a vase of Soma.
And then just quick question. Is that why the symbol, the Hippocrates symbol, has a snake winding up?
I think that has a different origin.
Okay, got it.
I mean, if you want to know, there is a parasitic worm which is found in Mediterranean.
Okay.
And the traditional way of removing the worm was to make an incision which exposed part of the worm, but the worm would be under the skin, you see.
Right.
They would make an incision and take a stick and wind the worm around the stick and take it out of people's skin, which is probably the origin of that symbol for Hippocrates. Now,
not nearly as exciting or inspiring as the Naga wrapping itself around a mountain.
Well, there was, as you're American, there is an interesting American sidelight on this. The AMA, the American Medical Association, in the middle of the 19th century, hired an artist to produce a symbol for them.
Right.
And he looked at the symbol of Hippocrates and said, no, this other one with two snakes is much more symmetrical and so, but it has nothing to do with medicine. That is the symbol of Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And so for over 100 years, the AMA was saddled with this totally irrelevant symbol of two snakes. However, earlier in the 21st century, they fessed up and said, no, we've been using the wrong symbol all this time, and we're going to go to the correct symbol. And now they use the one snake of Hippocrates.
That's more like the parasite being wrapped around the stick.
Indeed it is. Yes. So back to
it's not even actually a snake, it's parasite.
That's right. It's a worm, in fact.
A worm, okay.
And so, I mean, who would like a worm as their symbol? It's like obvious. Yeah. So they after pulling the snake back and forth for 1,000 years, they get all these wonderful products from the ocean, culminating in Dr. Dhanvantari with his pot of Soma. But they also And it varies. Sometimes it comes directly from the ocean. Sometimes it comes from the snake's vomit, the naga vomit. Is this poison called hala hala, and the gods panic and say, "What are we going to do with this? If we allow it to remain, it'll poison the entire world and everyone will die." And Shiva says, "That's okay, I'll take care of it." And he swallows the poison. And at this, two of the other gods panic. One is Parvati, his wife, who puts her hand at the base of his throat. And the other is the god Vishnu, who slaps his hand over Shiva's mouth and says, "And don't vomit it either. You'll kill us all." And so it permanently marks Shiva's throat, which is why Shiva has a blue throat. Now, you might say that this is actually a mythological correlate of the psilocybe mushroom.
I was going to ask you, because the psilocybe mushroom has that blue
Yes.
hue.
Yeah, it's
Funny. I'm wearing a blue shirt. I didn't even. So we're talking about it.
This is that blueness on the mushroom is actually psilocin oxide.
Okay.
It's oxidized psilocin, and it's not psychoactive. And there's no simple way of reducing psilocin oxide back to psilocin. But fortunately, the mushroom also contains psilocybin, which is a precursor of psilocin. So we consider psilocybin to be psychedelic, but it's not. It just gets converted to a psychedelic as soon as we eat it.
Got it. So before you ingest it, it's not psychedelic. After you ingest it, it is psychedelic.
It is. I mean, there is something in the mushroom, a certain amount of psilocin. Psilocin is psychedelic.
Okay.
But after you, it requires two enzymes to work on it, to turn it into psilocybin, which is a simpler compound.
Got it. Okay.
Now, where were we? Yes, the peacocks. We didn't finish off the stuff.
The parasol.
Yeah. Now, there is an Indian myth, an Indian legend, a folk tale, a folk version of this episode, which is called the Samanta Mantana, which is the Samudra Mantanam, sorry, which means the churning of the ocean. And in this, the part which is played by Shiva in the approved version is actually played by a peacock.
Oh, interesting.
And there is a very ancient poetic metaphor for the peacock, which is Nilakanta, which sounds remarkably similar to Nilakanda, which so one means blue stem, and the other means blue throat. So the peacock is called the blue-throated one. But you can see how it could easily be used as a way around the anti-mushroom laws of the Brahmins of the Vedic period.
Right.
They were very, very much anti-mushrooms. My theory, which I think is pretty well borne out, is that they banned everyone else from finding out that Soma was in fact a mushroom. And in the laws of Manu, the earliest legal text ever anywhere in the world, they say that anyone who picks a mushroom is guilty of a crime equivalent to anyone who wounds a Brahmin.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
in the commentaries, they say, and furthermore, anyone who eats a mushroom is guilty of a crime equivalent to killing a Brahmin.
And why do they say that?
Oh, why do you think they wanted to stop people eating mushrooms? I mean, that they knew that Soma or Amrita was the basis of their Agnihotra, the fire ceremony.
Mm.
They would have patrons, kings, and so on, who pay them a lot to come and sit for a week while they built the eagle-shaped hearth, and all sat around it singing hymns, and eventually they would crush the Soma plant, whatever it was, and we know it's a mushroom, but we keep quiet about that. And they would grind the mushroom with water or milk and produce this liquid which they would drink. But first they would pour some onto the sacrificial fire, which was at the center of this eagle-shaped hearth. And by doing so, they said that the Soma arose to heaven and was drunk by that celebrated Soma fiend Indra, king of the gods, who was always high on Soma. And whenever he had to do anything, he always drank Soma first. And it wasn't only Soma, but he also drank there is a plant called Nux vomica, which contains strychnine, and he would take this as well. Now, strychnine is a very smooth, very effective stimulant. If you take a little too much, it might overstimulate your heart, and that would be the end of you. But you know, I have actually tried strychnine in small doses, and it is a much nicer stimulant than amphetamine. But I wouldn't recommend that anyone tries it because there's that unfortunate side effect of it being highly toxic.
Right.
But the toxicity comes from its stimulant properties. You just like overstimulate yourself. Where were we?
We were still talking about the peacock parasol.
The peacock, yes. So this Nilakanta and was seen as a kind of nod and a knowing wink to Nilakanta, which that one meant blue throat. Like obviously the peacock has a blue throat, and it's blue pretty much the rest of the body too.
Right.
Everything apart from its tail is blue, but which by the way is a very uncommon color in nature.
Oh,
Very,
really?
very few. Well, if you can think of any blue animals.
Oh, I guess that's true, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking now.
All blue in nature is caused by refraction and not by a pigment.
Got
So,
it.
so peacocks have uh, feathers that have minute fibers which interfere with light such that it's refracted
Mm.
into this blue color. Occasionally, very occasionally, you'll find a peacock which has the wrong spacing in its feathers, and these peacocks are pure white.
Right. Yes, I've seen those.
Right, it's because the um the feathers are just a microscopic amount out. They don't refract light in the correct manner.
That's fascinating.
So what else was there in this in the image of Singhavaktra?
Let's see. Hold on, I'm looking. And then you said you didn't know about the three-legged.
No, that is a mystery. I'm not sure why she rides a three-legged mule, and why the mule has an eye in its posterior.
Right. It says, okay, this is what it says. Here Ramati rides her three-eyed mule over an ocean of blood, dotted with lumps of fat,
Yes,
with a peacock feather
red blood,
over her head.
red blood with globs of white fat.
Right.
Remind you of anything?
Yes, the Amanita muscaria mushrooms.
Exactly. Yes.
Got it. That's fascinating.
Well, these deities weren't created with no meaning behind their symbols. All the
Right.
symbols had a meaning, and basically in Vajrayana Buddhism, there are 7 levels of secrecy.
Mm.
You take the initiation of um, Singhamukha, and you will be told the first level of secrecy.
Mm.
You won't, all of this stuff will not be revealed until you get to the highest level. You're perhaps the Lama's favorite student or whatever. And then you'll be told all the levels of secrecy. Unfortunately, I've only had the first level. So what I write in this article is mere guesswork, but it's educated guesswork.
Yeah. And are you going to publish the article? If people see the podcast and want to read the article, is there anywhere that they could access it?
Well, I'm thinking of doing a podcast of my own, in which I'll point all this out. I have some other ideas for other podcasts.
Okay. I love
That oh, okay. Here's how I foresee one of the podcasts going. Okay, it's ancient India, right?
Okay.
And there is a king um, whose wife dies in childbirth,
Mm.
but the child has certain marks on his body, lakshanas, as they're called in Sanskrit,
Mm.
and he calls them for the wise men to come and interpret these lakshanas, the 32 lakshanas.
Mm.
And the wise men say, oh, he'll be a great, either a great king or a great spiritual leader. He'll either be a king of the world or the great uh, wise man of the world. And the father, the king, instantly said, well, how do I stop him being a wise man? I want him to rule the world. And they say, well, you've got to keep him trapped in the palace. Give him all the distractions you can. Teach him all the sports. Have him be a great wrestler, and also find him lots of concubines and wives. And he does. He marries him off to a cousin who eventually has a baby girl, and eventually the young man is still unsatisfied with his life and decides to escape the palace. And he sneaks out one day and goes to the forest, where he meditates for over 3 years, and he becomes enlightened, teaches lots and lots of disciples, and eventually, when he's 80 years old, he dies. Now, who was that?
I have no idea.
Oh dear. Now, you might have said that was the Buddha.
But it wasn't.
Well, there was one clue in there. He had a daughter. The Buddha had a son. Otherwise, everything else is the same.
Right.
This is the story of Mahavira, the founder of Jainism.
Got it.
So there are other strange things, like the Jains say that Mahavira had a student called Gautama Siddhartha. And we know Gautama Siddhartha as the Buddha. My hypothesis is that this was originally the same story, but in order for it to be told about these two different spiritual leaders, it would have had to have had a much earlier origin. Now, the Buddhist version says that the king was the king of Magadha on the borders of India and Nepal. We know about Magadha. We have studied the history and the archaeology of Magadha. And as far as we can make out, it was a republic. It didn't have a king.
Got it.
So we know the Buddhist version, the Buddhist story is wrong.
Right.
And so maybe there is a time in the past when there was one common story, but then the Jains insisted that there is a thing called the soul, and it's eternal, and all this stuff. And Buddhists said, no, there's no soul, and it's not eternal. And maybe there is a momentary, moment-to-moment soul, but you can't say that it has any degree of permanency.
We could do a whole podcast just comparing different stories.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. I mean, the Jains say that Mahavira was the 23rd Tirthankara, the ford crosser, and there were 22 previous enlightened characters. Now, Buddhists also say that the Buddha was the 23rd in the history of enlightened people. But they say, they call heretics. We Buddhists call all heretics Tirthankaras. And this has never, ever been used by Hindus. Although we call Hindus Tirthankaras too.
Right.
Although they never use that term themselves. The ones who do use it are the Jains.
Got it. Okay, well, we sadly have to stop for today, but I literally could spend the rest of the day talking to you. So maybe you'll come back and we'll just do a whole series of topics.
Oh, maybe so, yes.
There's so much. It's like you start one thing and then we're over here and I'm like, oh, I want to know about all the threads. And this has just been so deeply lovely.
Yeah.
Well,
it's been fun talking to you.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully we'll do it again. And maybe we'll just make a whole series of podcasts on different topics. I would love it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Bye now.
This has been Journey into the Mystic with Rachel Pelletier and Lama Mike Crowley. Join us again, and we will see you soon.